Welcome to the Digital Marketing Insights podcast, brought to you by Brightside Digital.
Hi everyone. I'm delighted to say we have James Connor today, who's a marketing manager. James, how you doing?
Very well. How are you?
Yeah, very good, buddy. James, let's start off by you telling everyone a little bit about yourself and your career to date, please.
Sure. So my name is James Connor. I've been working in B2B marketing for just about 10 years now. So all the way back in 2014, NUIG, University of Galway now, they threw me out into the real world with a master's of strategic marketing at the time. I made my first steps with a financial research company called Lafferty Group back home in County Mayo, where I started as an intern. Then I moved on to a company called Peninsula, who are leading specialists in HR and employment law. Spent a bit of time with a SaaS startup called Orbital in tender responses and document management. Following that, I moved into a multinational called Explio, who do a great many things, but best described as a global engineering, consulting, and digital transformation company. Currently, I am the marketing manager for Openmind Networks, who are world leaders in the messaging industry. So Openmind provides technology products and solutions to some of the biggest telecom operators in the world. So a wide variety of roles, a wide variety of responsibilities, and a wide variety of industries over the years.
I love that. And what I love the most about guests that have so many different companies within the same kind of marketing area is you kind of learn quickly there's so many different ways to market a business, and certain things will work for some of those companies that didn't work for others. That gives you a much better view of the market. But can you run down what you see as your greatest strengths in B2B marketing, maybe platforms or how you operate and stuff? Just give me an overview of your strengths in that area.
Sure. So over the course of my career, I've been very fortunate, sometimes unfortunate, I suppose. I've been able to turn my hand to pretty much every aspect of the marketing function. I would say my primary strength, and I guess where my passion and my interest lies day to day, is in lead gen and demand gen. So if you were to imagine marketing and marketers on a spectrum, I would always view myself as more sort of analytical maybe than the more creative types that you might see in B2C, for example. So I take almost a sort of weird enjoyment out of analyzing data sets, getting into the weeds a wee bit on your analytics, your LinkedIn campaign manager to get insights into what's happening, what's working, what's not working, and seeing where we can iterate and where we can improve, improve your ROI, improve your click-through rates, improve your engagement, whatever it is, the objectives that you're working to on any one campaign. So as I said, I've been pretty much involved end to end across marketing, but I would definitely say my primary strength would be in sort of demand generation.
Brilliant. And you kind of touched on LinkedIn there, but what would you see as your main platforms? Let's say you had a new client, B2B marketing. What areas would be your comfort zones to go into and say, okay, we'll try this to see if this channel works for lead gen? And can you break down a couple of those different options, please?
Sure, yeah. So I'm always a big believer in talking to your target audience where they are, not necessarily where you want them to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, if you're talking to a CEO or a CMO, for example, we all want to go viral on TikTok. We all want to get the out-of-home advertising, get the brand name, brand awareness out there. So obviously I've been working primarily in B2B over the course of my career. So the best channel for me and the channel I found the most success in has been LinkedIn. Just in the sense that more so than say Google Ads, for instance, which we also run and you kind of have to. LinkedIn has given me and given the companies I work for just that ability to really dig down, really drill in by be it geography, industry, job title, And that's enabled us, for digital advertising, for instance, to really, do copy and write copy for different segments, different market segments based on your ICP. And I found as well that the ROI and the return on ad spend has been much more effective on things like LinkedIn, where maybe people are that wee bit more specific. Whereas with Google Ads, for example, you have to cover a huge range of topics. With Openmind Networks, where I am now, for instance, we do a lot of messaging hubs, enabling messaging for mobile operators. So you're kind of getting into the weeds a wee bit when you're targeting a keyword like SMS, which is so broad and it's going to be so expensive. So, as I said, I'm a huge believer in, speak to your audience where they are. Like you could do a homepage takeover of the Irish Times, which would be fantastic, and it looks great in a marketing report. But if your target market, if they're not in Ireland, if they don't read the Irish Times, if they're not, it really depends on who you are and who you want to talk to. But me personally, I found a lot of success on LinkedIn.
And when you say LinkedIn advertising, are we talking kind of in message introducing yourself kind of marketing, or more the ads popping up in their feeds trying to infiltrate them so they approach you rather than you approach them? Is it more, I suppose, cold outreach, or is it more you're trying them to be proactive?
I think it depends on the campaign. It depends on the objective. So I've done all of those things over the years. I think the greatest success I have found has been, I guess you would call it native advertising. So if you want to do a lead gen or a single image ad that just pops up in their newsfeed on LinkedIn, and I said that's where I found a lot of success in terms of both brand awareness and lead gen. So the in-message advertising, like you were saying, we did have a lot of success with that over the years, but they brought in new rules just recently that they don't allow people to do that in the EU, I think it is. I think it's allowed outside of the EU. So obviously, again, depending on your target market, that may or may not affect you. They do have a new iteration of in-message ads at the moment that they've called something slightly different. I can't remember the name of off the top of my head. But yeah, I think it very much when you're launching a new campaign or you're launching a new digital advertising campaign, like with anything else in marketing, you really need to sit down and sort of agree on your objectives, what you want to achieve, how you want to achieve it. And that will then infer what kind of ads you use. So you might use, for instance, a website visits objective that is driving traffic to your website, which is something that we also use. And then if your primary focus or your primary KPI is something like, I need X amount of leads by the end of the month, then obviously your lead gen forms are the way to go. But you do need to be on top of then things like creating the right type of content. So you can use gated content to drive engagement and so on. There is no one silver bullet, really, unfortunately. You just have to be consistent with what you're doing and make sure that you are reaching the right people. So as I said, I have found personally that LinkedIn Campaign Manager has enabled me to do that a wee bit better and a wee bit more specific than something like Google Ads.
Love it. And probably one that your experience would really answer this, but in terms of lead gen, what have you found is the best way to entice the lead gen? So like, do you offer, I'm guessing you've been through all of it, free PDFs, webinars, just general information, free trials, stuff like that. What have you found works really well in that space for, let's just talk about this generally.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, free trials, things like that, obviously more SaaS oriented. So again, I don't think there's any one marketing that applies to every company across the board. But what I would say is that, content is king. It's like anything else that you do. So in B2B especially, and, B2C as well, like you're talking to people, so if you can produce a piece of content that speaks to their pain point, if you can produce a piece of content that speaks to, I would always say, different stages of the consumer journey. So you might have your research stage, your consideration stage. You don't want to fall into the trap, I suppose, of creating nice, fluffy content at the top of the funnel, which is sometimes a wee bit easier. Like, for instance, if you were with Orbital, for example, which was tender management, we might explain how the tender process works. So that's quite top of funnel stuff, but you don't want to just jam your funnel at the top. Like, you want to be creating content even maybe with sales enablement in mind. That's a bit more consideration stage. So to go back to lead gen, to be well aware, I suppose, of your ICP, of what they're talking about, what's bothering them. I'm in the messaging space at the moment, and that moves so fast and so quickly. Just to keep an eye maybe on industry events, maybe keep an eye on certain hashtags that you might follow. So I seen a great stat a few years ago when I was at LinkedIn at an event there. They said 74% of B2B buyers buy from brands that help them. So if your content can answer a question, explain a topic, maybe if you have an SEO checklist, for example, that might be something that your HubSpot would do, just to outline what you should be doing, how you should be doing it. Then maybe further down the line, when you have a bit of a handle on it and you feel like you need to automate that process, HubSpot would be maybe the top of mind brand that you go to. So definitely, I think don't be creating content for the sake of creating content, I guess, is what I would say as well. Do put some thought into it. It's not always easy, to take the time, and in an ideal world, you do a primary research white paper, all good things like that. That's not always possible. But definitely, I would say, to get the most engagement possible from the outset, definitely be mindful of your content and make sure you're speaking to your ICP. And then obviously, you can iterate on things like your bid, your budget, who you're targeting. Maybe certain geographies are super engaged, but then you never hear from them again, so you might want to cut them out. You can iterate like that as well on, I guess, a more technical level as you go on.
Yeah, really well said. And kind of pulling this all together, and I do want you to talk a little bit about the consideration phase, because I'm guessing you do the lead gen, you acquire these emails, but that doesn't necessarily lead into sales or service or whatever comes from it. So you have this second tier of creatives that assist with the kind of known contacts, the known leads. And you've mentioned HubSpot there, but can you kind of pull this all together from a point of view of a campaign that you're really proud of, or a kind of a project that you've pulled everything together and made it really successful?
Sure. I guess the campaign that I'd be most proud of, personally and professionally, that would be a lead gen campaign that we ran during my time with Orbital. So what Orbital does is it's essentially a tender management SaaS platform. So it helps companies find opportunities, helps them manage their tender documents, so on. I won't go into too much detail about it. But, I guess the big thing there, with the greatest will in the world, procurement and tendering is not particularly glamorous, and it's not particularly something that people enjoy doing. Even my CEO at the time, he used to always say, no one grew up dreaming of being a bid writer. And I suppose the conversations that we would have with our ICP at that point and our target market would be that their belief was that tendering was a bit of a closed shop. There's no tenders out there for me. The ones that are out there, they're going to go to the big four because they just do everything anyway. They find a way. So I guess we were facing the challenge of both selling the benefits of our platform and, I guess, the actual tendering process itself. So what we did, after a great deal of learning, primarily through digital advertising, as I mentioned, but also, like you're saying, tying it all together with our blog content, our webinars, our in-person workshops, was to highlight just how lucrative this marketplace actually is. So we started to promote not just the brand, not just the service, but individual tender opportunities. that are live and accepting submissions. So what I had in my mind was a kind of inception type idea, where the target audience would be alerted to a high value contract, but then, okay, well, how in the hell do I actually go about doing a tender? And then that's sort of generates the need for our service, if that makes sense. So that was a big thing for us in terms of lead gen at the top of the funnel, and then demand gen, I suppose. I sometimes think of the two things differently, because you can easily create leads. It's a wee bit harder to create demand. So, that's when things like you're following up with your lead nurture program in terms of, this is a good blog you should read. This is a webinar based in that industry. We're doing an in-person workshop next week if you want to come along. So, you're building that interest and you're building that demand the whole way through. And then you have a sort of scalable and repeatable model then for creating consideration stage people, if that makes sense. So, I guess why I mentioned that one is that very quickly became both the primary source of leads for Orbital, but also the primary source of revenue, which means that you're creating good leads. And the ROAS on that was through the roof. It was very good for us in terms of, we were much more specific on LinkedIn in terms of, okay, this is a HR tender that's live in Ireland today. So we sort of left Google Ads a wee bit to brand awareness and a bit more generic stuff, and we put a lot of focus on that. And as I said, once we've seen the deals come through, that's what tells you as a marketer that you're doing the right thing. And you can lean into that then moving forward.
When you hear so many marketers, especially even on this show, they talk about target audience and knowing what works for you and stuff. That's a perfect example of you guys in that moment pulling through and doubling down on what it looks like is working really well for you. So really good example. Just because you did mention it earlier, HubSpot, is that your go-to lead gen platform to kind of pull in the data away from a kind of a back-end CMS? Do you have a preference for HubSpot?
I do like HubSpot. At the moment, our CRM is Salesforce. And we also use Pardot then as our email marketing software as well. So, what I would say, if you're looking at a CRM, like UX and UI is a big thing sometimes for people. And it's a big thing for me as well. I don't always like change. So when I had to go from HubSpot to Salesforce, I was like, oh God, it's going to take forever. But like with any CRM, it's as good as the data you put into it. So I used Zoho for a while, which you may or may not be familiar with as well. So they have Zoho CRM. They have a lot of different modules that all talk to each other, and we just had to put the time in at Orbital to make them talk to each other. But what we always used to say was crap in, crap out. Maybe a bit more fruitful language sometimes. But
it's okay.
If you spend a lot of money on Salesforce, a lot of money on HubSpot, whatever your CRM of choice is, if your processes aren't right and marketing and sales are not aligned, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I am a big fan of HubSpot. But currently we're using Salesforce, which is very powerful as well. And as I say, it just takes a wee bit of time to get the processes down and make sure everyone's driving in the same direction. And once the data is clean going in, it's going to be clean coming out. The inferences you can make and reporting and so on, I don't think they vary too much from CRM to CRM. And it does at a certain level come down to a personal preference, maybe with a GUI or whatever. But certainly I found them all to be very powerful once, as I say, you have the processes down.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you did mention Zoho in that bracket, because it's the cost effective of the three.
Yeah,
HubSpot and Salesforce, they're tiered systems. So for anyone that's a small business, small business, there's a lot more legwork and integration for a Zoho CRM and building that system. HubSpot does have a lot of support, but a tiered system. Every time you get to a certain level, they're like, oh no, that's on our next package up. Which the pricing is
in your pocket again.
Exactly. And as well as I know, you have your sales and your marketing section and your reporting section and all these sections, and you have to unlock each tier, and each time it's an extra 500 or 2,000 stuff going up the tiers. You can rack up 8,000-9,000 on HubSpot and Salesforce fairly quickly by opening up their different areas, which is a lot for any business who might have a smaller lead gen process.
Yeah.
But really glad you mentioned it, because it's good for people to know walking into these things.
Yeah.
And away from where you kind of your current knowledge, where do you go for new insights and information?
I suppose in terms of straight marketing or digital marketing, it's the usual stuff. I'm sure you've heard 1,000 times before. I follow people on LinkedIn. I'm not going to start naming names because I will inevitably forget people.
That's okay.
I use things like Google Alerts to keep up with industry trends. I listen to podcasts, just like this one. I suppose specifically today, because I've moved into the telco industry, which is quite new to me. I've been doing a lot of research on, I guess, my target market and my industry. So obviously people listening will have their own respective markets, but it's hugely important for me to be aware of the pain points of, what's coming down the line. So it might be something like DORA in the financial thing. I'm in messaging now, so it's okay, 2G, 3G is kind of dying off. Now it's time for 5G, 6G. What does that mean? What are we going to speak to about that? So, as I said a little bit ago, that enables me and it enables the team here to create content that people are going to engage with, that answers their questions, be it a blog, a webinar, a white paper. So, that's big for us as well. And I do also like to keep an eye out on other brands in my market, and in social media in general, really, to get some inspiration in terms of even assets to put on an ad or the type of gated content that you engage with. So obviously, if it's a competitor, you can't just replicate what they've done and put your name on it. But it's always useful to keep an eye, and LinkedIn is very good at this actually in the back end, the analytics section of your company page. If you have a company page, you can identify some competitors and compare your performance to their performance. Or even you can just put in companies that you like the look of. And that just keeps an eye on their followers, on their engagement metrics, all good things like that, which people might find useful. But equally important, if your competitor is maybe not doing something, if they only post once a month, maybe you can get ahead of them in that game. They have the suggested post now on LinkedIn for employees, where you can essentially say, this is the post, could you please share it? And it gives people the option of editing it before they share it. But lots of people usually don't take that option because we're all very busy people. So, if one of your competitors maybe has many more employees than you and they're all sharing the same thing at the same time, they will get a certain amount of engagement for sure. But I think people do see through things like that a little bit, and they can tell when people aren't being genuine. So maybe that might be what you do to set yourself apart. So a long-winded answer to a simple question is just sort of keeping an eye out on what's going on. And then obviously there'll be industry publications and so on, and the usual stuff like the LinkedIn B2B newsletter, the AMA newsletter. There's all very good resources out there for people.
But I think you've hit the nail on the head of why you're so successful as well, James, when you're going to new roles, which is probably, as a manager, you probably would appreciate me even saying this, but whenever someone starts in a new industry or for a new team and stuff, try and start following relevant social accounts, start signing up to newsletters within that industry and stuff, and kind of surround yourself in the knowledge, so you're always picking up things throughout a day or a week within the industry. And that's how all marketers kind of become successful in a way. Is you have to know your foundations to marketing, but then you always have to keep up with the trends and knowing what's new, what's working well for aligning industries or in your industry. And you can only really do that by following and subscribing and putting in place a couple of learning areas that, I don't think I've spoken to anyone where when you hire a new member of staff, there's almost a hit list of you normally get your competitors and stuff within the industry, but this is like here's the overview of the industry, and these are the things that you should sign up for and follow within yourself to understand your industry as well. So I think you summarized that really well. Just you yourself for a second, is there any way you're looking to upskill or learn more in?
Well, you always have to keep an eye out, I guess, in marketing, especially because things are moving so quickly. But I guess the big thing in every industry now, not just marketing, is AI. So I'm quite excited about AI. I don't think that it's going to steal our jobs or anything like that. I think it's actually probably going to end up creating jobs in marketing, So for sure, it's going to change the way we do things. And you can see with like the Google helpful content update that came out this year, they're starting to embrace AI from even like an SERP perspective. So that's a big one for me to keep an eye on, even to upskill, or if there's any formal training that can be done. I'm sure that's going to come a thing, with the Institute of Digital Marketing and stuff. I feel like those courses are going to be big in the next couple of years for sure, if they're not already here. And then, like I said, just on a day-to-day basis, you have to use Google Ads every day. You have to use analytics. Even the switch over to GA4, it annoyed me just because the interface changed.
Yeah, you don't like change.
It's not even, yeah. I like taking risks, but I just don't like when my interface changes.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's like they have all the same reports, but they're just slightly not where they used to be.
Yeah.
So just little things like that. You just have to keep abreast of it, and as things change, But if I had to pick any one thing, I think AI probably would be the big one. As I said before, it's not going to be a silver bullet, I don't think, but it is going to change the way that we operate. And we're probably not too far away from things like AI ads. And, some people out there are probably looking into conversational AI with chatbots and, virtual agents and so on. So it's definitely something that I think we're all going to have to embrace, and even at a very basic level, keep an eye on and just know what it does.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of to bring this show back to near the beginning, I normally ask what you see as the biggest opportunity in the digital industry, and we'll take that as AI. But looking at B2B specifically, what do you think is the best recommendation you can give to a business that wants to do B2B marketing right now, currently? So not necessarily in the future, but what do you think is the biggest opportunity in B2B?
I guess I would say, like I mentioned a couple of times before, I think people will see through if you're doing things for the sake of doing it a wee bit. So, I guess things coming down the line, if you were to use AI, for instance, like ChatGPT, greatest thing ever, when we all discovered it. But I would say never, if you can avoid it, do something to the effect of, oh, we should put a blog out, and just ask ChatGPT to write a blog.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned before when we were talking about software, like you should have your processes in place before you look to automate them, and know that they're working. So things like lead nurturing, like lead gen, they're kind of annoying and they're kind of time consuming sometimes.
Yeah.
But you could use, for instance, we use a program called Dripify, which is very useful for LinkedIn reach out, and it sort of automates that process a wee bit. But you have to have your lead nurture in place. You need to know what works. You need to have your content all lined up and so on. I guess a big thing for me coming down the road, I would refer to it, for want of a better phrase, as personalized marketing. So that's going beyond, hi, first name. We care very deeply about company name. But, taking the time to research the pain point, maybe even on an ABM level, if you can, and you have the time and the resource to understand the individual company, where they are they in the news, are they facing a challenge, are they planning to do something, And then that's going to allow you to create content that speaks to them. They're going to feel like they're not part of a lead nurture or just a generic reach out. Because I think, email software and all these things are phenomenal tools, but I think we're all past the point of being impressed with when James is in the subject line and there's emojis and stuff. I think just a little bit deeper. And I guess, like I said at the top, the best marketing is the marketing that works, in a lot of ways. So just because, people are like Coca-Cola might go viral with a campaign, or, your target market mightn't care about TikTok. My current target market definitely doesn't care about TikTok.
Yeah.
Some of them will actually be put out by people using smartphones a little bit, maybe. So, talk to your market where they are, maybe do a little bit of research. Don't be afraid to see what other people are doing, I guess. A big thing for me, I guess, would be something like immersive marketing or almost gamification of marketing. So just something to get people's engagement, like when they drop onto your website, do you have a video? Video never went away, but I think it's going to be bigger moving forward. User generated content, explainer videos. Can you demystify what can often be complicated products in 30 seconds or less? So yeah, maybe, I guess, if you were starting off B2B marketing, start off small, just understand your pain point, understand what it is you do better than everyone else. I'm a huge believer in, I guess, benefit-driven copy rather than this is us, this is what we do, this is why you should care.
Yeah.
You have to, like, if you go into Google Analytics and you look at your bounce rate, you look at your average session, you don't have any time. You don't have time for people to sit there and read a full page. You have to grab them with your H1. You have to grab them with your asset. You have to, is it a quiz? You need something to keep their attention. So yeah, as I said, I don't think there's only one silver bullet, but just consistency, have a plan, work to your plan. Don't try a H1 today and change it tomorrow if you don't have any leads. Sometimes you have to be brave and sort of sit in the pocket for a while and just let things happen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Don't freak out when you spend the first amount of money on a campaign and think you might go all wrong. You have to trust sometimes the process takes a little bit of time.
Yeah, it's not going to turn around overnight. If you're implementing a new process, sometimes it's a wee bit like turning an oil tanker sometimes. But if you know your audience, if you know your value, then it will work. And that consistency is key as well.
Love it, James. And lastly, my question I always end the show with is, if you could boil up one personality trait that you have yourself that you could pass on to others, what would it be?
Oh, wow. I'm pretty much the king of imposter syndrome. So I really hate these questions. But I suppose the biggest trait that I would have picked up personally, working in all these different industries and different teams, different sizes, is adaptability, I would say. So as you know, and I'm sure everyone listening knows, that the marketing landscape is changing, new trends emerging all the time, new technologies like we've talked about. We're not all lucky enough to have an SEO team and a graphic design team and, maybe a sales enablement team between sales and marketing. So there's going to be times that you have to be adaptable. You have to turn your hands to different aspects of the function. Sometimes you have to get out to events and shake people's hands. You have to get on the phone and do a bit of cold calling, obviously depending on your team, your industry, your business. So definitely, I think if there's any one thing that I certainly am proud of and I've picked up, it's adaptability. If you are a creative genius and you can just come up with phenomenal assets and phenomenal copy off the top of your head, then you're going to do okay. But I have found that most marketers and most marketing teams have to wear a lot of different hats on any given day. So I would definitely say adaptability is a big one.
Brilliant. That's it, James. If anyone wants to find you or see your work, how can they find you?
I guess the easiest way would be LinkedIn. So I'm managing and curating the social accounts for Openmind at the moment, so I'm always active there. I do try to share some of my insights and some of my learnings along the way as well. So certainly people can reach out to me on LinkedIn if they want, and also reach me on X. Still adjusting to not saying Twitter, but I will get there eventually. And I suppose it would be remiss of me not to direct a certain cohort of people to openmindnetworks.com to check out the great work we're doing there. There might be someone out there in the telco industry who wants to learn a bit more, but definitely on a personal level, make sure to reach out to me on LinkedIn if anyone wants to connect and discuss.
Listen, James, thanks so much for the wonderful episode. Thanks everyone for watching, listening, and everything else. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.